This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies Singapore. This is the 4th season and I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director of IPS and also a former journalist. Today's episode is on speaking English and the mother tongue. We have Dr Teo Kay Key, IPS Research Fellow, whose research interests are in political and societal attitudes, public opinion, voting behaviour and Singapore society. We also have Kishan Singh, who is a science educator and only learned his mother tongue Hindi formally in his mid-20s. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you.
Hi. So, Kay Key, you wrote an op-ed on how becoming proficient in English has come at a cost for many Singaporeans. So, what do you mean by that?
The op-ed was really to talk about the different languages that we use for different aspects of our lives. We all know English is the official first language of Singapore, right? And I think most of us converse quite comfortably in English as well, especially since we have a lot of different other languages around. So it's a bit more like if you know other languages, people may not know those languages. So English is a connector in that sense. But then there are other languages that we know, which sort of the competencies seem to have dropped over time. For example, our official mother tongues, to give the most direct and closest example. So, for example, Mandarin for the Chinese, Malay for the Malays, as well as Tamil for the Indians. So these are the languages that seem to have seen the proficiencies drop over the years.
Okay. So, Kishan, then, what happened was I sent you the article before this recording. So, what's your thoughts about this op-ed then?
Oh, I mean, when I read the op-ed, I totally understood the tension of it, right? And for the most part, I agree. We are gaining in some way by being proficient in English, but we have also, for the most part, lost a lot of our culture because that's what our mother tongue is, right? It's an anchor to our culture. So I 100% agree with that aspect, with what Kay Key wrote in that article. I totally agree. But for me, because my mother tongue is Hindi, which is a non-Tamil Indian language in Singapore. So it was a language that when I was in school wasn't offered in the education system here in Singapore. And that made it a bit difficult to find my identity. Because if we are linking mother tongue to cultural identity, then I was totally absent in the school context. And I had to find my identity in different ways. And so I use English as a way to reshape my identity a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe you can explain, so what happened? Like, why did your parents decide to not teach you Hindi in the first place when you were a kid?
This is an issue for a lot of non-Tamil Indians in Singapore, right? Especially when we were schooling in the 80s and the 90s. So when we were in school, we were given the option to either take up Malay or, Mandarin. So Bahasa Melayu or Mandarin, and my parents immediately gravitated to Bahasa Melayu simply because we use the alphabet. And my parents, Bahasa Melayu uses the alphabet rather. And my parents were already speakers of Bahasa Melayu, so they thought they could help me out with it. The reason they moved away, more to the point of your question, why they moved away from wanting to teach me Hindi or have me learn Hindi outside in the Hindi school were two factors. First, they did not see any utility in it. And I understand this very much because in the context of when we were growing up, there was no sight or sound of Hindi. So the fact that there was no utility in it is very obvious. It was very stark. So it was never apparent. We didn't hear it at all outside of our home, of our family. There didn't seem any use for it. The second reason was more logistics. Because it was never taught in our schools from Monday to Friday during lessons, students who spoke these non-Tamil Indian languages had to go to the schools, the external venue schools on Saturdays, which really just took up a lot of time. So logistics and utility were two main reasons that they were like, you don't need to learn this formally. But I also have to say that them not teaching me didn't actually mean that they didn't try to inform me about my culture in other ways. Right? Language is a very strong anchor into culture, I agree, but it is only one anchor into culture. Religion, I'm not religious right now, but I grew up religious, my religious family, cultural festivities, festivals, and just being around family members who spoke the language was an immersion of sorts, whether I liked it or not. Yeah.
Okay. Kishan, when you said utility, that really stood out for me because it seems very pragmatic and practical.
Yeah, it's a Singapore poison.
So, Kay Key, is that a big reason why our mother tongue proficiency fell over the years?
I think pragmatism is probably a very important point because you do see the utility, right? For example, from the start, perhaps when the education system started being formed under the Singapore government, you also saw that actually the English language had some sort of a premium because people who were good at the English language got better jobs. They were able to apply for civil service jobs compared to people who are less proficient. So these did have practical advantages, and I think parents saw that. And so they wanted that for their children as well, to make sure that they could succeed in life. And it's a very Singaporean thing, I would think. Yeah, I would totally see where Kishan's parents are coming from, because it does sound like very practical concerns, and they definitely wanted him to succeed in life and, be able to converse very comfortably in English. But I think even for the Chinese population, even though we say that the official language is Mandarin, I think a lot of our older generation folks actually do not speak Mandarin as their first language or even second language, because they do have the dialects. And I think for myself, there was also this aspect where we heard our grandparents' generation speaking dialects, so I could understand, but no fluency in it. So maybe I can speak a few sentences, but that's about it. So you cannot really carry a full conversation. So I was just lucky because my grandparents could speak other languages, so we could converse in those. But for other people, I think that's even a bigger loss.
KK, I think there's two issues here. First, you talk about dialect languages, right? And then you also mentioned about your Chinese proficiency. There's always this argument in Singapore also that, is Chinese really our mother tongue, or is Hokkien, Teochew, Cantonese our mother tongue languages?
Yeah, so do you catch at the start when I said official mother tongues?
Oh, wow, that's so subtle.
Yes. It is an official mother tongue, right? We're all supposed to learn Mandarin if you are part of the Chinese race. In that sense, we all get our first exposure to something that's related to the Chinese race in school via the Mandarin language. But I think a lot of us at home may have different languages to speak and to hear from our older generations.
Okay. But Kishan, there's no such thing as like this kind of dialect and all in Indian culture, right?
I don't know enough. I really have to admit to that. But if you were to ask me whether Hindi is a dialect or Punjabi is a dialect or Tamil dialect, I would say no. Root-wise, Tamil is totally different from Hindi and Punjabi, right? One is, if you follow the roots of the languages, that's as far as I know. Like the South Indian languages follow a different route from the North Indian languages. I wouldn't say that they are dialects. I would say that they are quite distinct languages that share a lot of similarities, though. Like Urdu, Punjabi and Hindi, they share a lot of similarities. So now that I understand Hindi a lot better, I do also understand Punjabi a lot better, and as a consequence, I understand Urdu a lot better. So all these things mesh together, but I don't know if they're dialects. Yeah, but the issue that I have, not the issue, the feeling that I have rather is a little bit distinct, right? Because, Tamil was predominantly the Indian language in Singapore. What that did for me was it just distanced myself from my Indianness, because again, there was no visual representation of who I was. So conceptually, there was a form of Indian that was accepted, or that was, open inverted commas, that was right. And because I didn't see myself in that, I had to fall back onto something else. Yeah. So that was my struggle growing up Indian as a young kid in the 90s and early 2000s. Yeah.
Kishan. But what I struggle to understand is because, okay, yes, Tamil is predominant in Singapore, but Hindi is a very common language, right? It's so prominent in India, and Bollywood is such a big thing, right? Were you influenced, or do you gravitate towards that?
Gravitate is one word. I was sucked in.
Okay.
Which I guess is a form of gravity.
Okay.
I was sucked in because it was just there, but it was very much against my will, because I was taught that I was wrong. For the longest time, my Indianness was wrong. Me being my Indian quality, anything Indian about me was wrong. And this, I think we are bordering from language and onto the perhaps even adjacent topic of racism, right? These two things, I think, they share some off-roots from each other, right? One might lead to the other. So growing up as an Indian child in Singapore, racism was definitely there, was definitely common. And I would get bullied about the fact that, I don't speak Tamil, or I speak Tamil. Either way, I couldn't win. And so that made me further want to distance myself from my Indianness. Bollywood was there at home, but because my parents have strong roots to it, because it is their culture, right? So they have strong roots to it because their parents, who came from India, have strong roots to it. So it wasn't as diluted for them as it was for me. And perhaps they didn't face that many issues growing up in the 60s in Singapore as I did in the 90s. So these are different struggles that we had, and therefore my response to it is a little bit different. So when you say gravitate, I guess I don't know if I would say gravitate. It was there, but I resisted it quite strongly. It reminded me of bullying. It reminded me that I was wrong. Yeah.
So you didn't watch any Bollywood movies?
No, I hated it.
Serious?
I legitimately hated it. I would lock myself in the room. I would not listen to it. My father is a musician. He used to do it on the side for fun. We would sing at Malay weddings. And they would sing a lot of Hindi songs and all that. So every Saturday, the house would be filled with Hindi music because all his friends would come over and they would play in the band to practice for the Sunday Malay wedding. And I would hate it. I would viscerally hate it because it was my culture at that time, of course. In my angsty teenage years, I was resisting everything. I was like, no, I must speak good English. I must lose my Indian identity and put on this rather blanket, almost non-identity, really. So I resisted that very much. And so I don't like it, yeah. Things only changed in my, as you pointed out in the introduction, in my 20s, yeah.
When you decided to start to
Embrace,
learn more,
I guess.
Embrace your culture.
Yeah,
and
embrace
your
my culture. Yeah, definitely. There are incidents that precipitated me wanting to then get closer to my culture. And a lot of that was work-related, right? I've been in situations where you would think that it wouldn't happen, but it does happen, where people would just speak in Mandarin, and I would, even though I was starkly there, it would just be a conversation entirely in Mandarin. I would be lost.
Then you'd be like Channel 5, right?
No, I don't. Because
You don't?
why is it
Not at
my
all?
responsibility?
Oh.
It shouldn't be my responsibility to remind you that I'm there. I think adults need to be better at this. And what is horrifying is that when I was working in the Ministry of Education, and I was doing some policy work, and it was interministerial. We had interministerial meetings, so members from each ministry and all that, they would forget that I was in the room, which is a bit shocking. Then I would get a bit upset, and I would say, hi, I'm also here. Yeah, and then it gave me some sort of pleasure to shame these people from different ministries to go, hey, don't forget, representatives of the different ministries, I'm here also. So yeah, all these things made me want to explore my culture a little bit better. And go like, wow, I feel so excluded. But now in my 20s, I wanted to find some power in things that I rejected, which is usually the case, right? I guess when minorities, when they get older, sometimes they want to reclaim incidents, reclaim our words sometimes, and make it their own because they don't want to give it power anymore. So I didn't want to give it power anymore. I wanted to know this unknown. So at the age of 20, oh gosh, I don't know 27, something like that. Okay, 27, 28, I was like, no, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to figure out how I can learn this. And there was a Hindi school somewhere in Little India. And I went for the Hindi school, just like totally didn't know what to expect. But the first class, I remember the language just prickled out from my skin. It was literally just on my skin, and it was so easy to speak words that I used to trip and tumble over. And I remember feeling very emotional. Wow, this is the language of my grandfather and my grandmother. For it to come out like honey out of my mouth meant that it was always there. And for years, I denied it. And I denied it for things. And I understood why I denied it. I am not angry that I denied it. I'm not angry at myself that I denied it. But I was angry at the situations that made me want to bury this. Because as I mentioned earlier, language is one of the anchors, but it's a very strong anchor to your culture. And things just started to bubble up. And it was a gateway to a lot of things. So it was quite lovely. Yeah.
Okay, so this reminds me of something, Kay Key, because this reminds me of some Chinese parents actually who may themselves be Chinese speaking, but force their kids to learn a lot of English and not teach them Chinese at all. Do you think this is quite similar? And what kind of phenomenon is this?
I think probably there is a slightly different kind of mechanism at work. Less of the discrimination probably, but more of the perhaps people who can speak Chinese better than English, they perhaps, maybe not discrimination, but they face some disadvantages when job searching or when conversing with people who are more conversant in English. So they could have faced all these difficulties outside in society, and then now they don't want this to happen to their children. And probably at the time of the 80s, 90s, where this language thing was going on, where people were actually very selective about the types of languages they learned and their children learned, this probably was one of the factors. And so they decided to make their children become more proficient in English and forsake the other languages that they speak at home or that they themselves might be more fluent in. But then again, it would really go on to more negative consequences in the future, because you realize that a lot of people currently, maybe their 30s, 40s, or 20s, they cannot speak any other language well other than English. And even some don't think that they speak English well. So it's really, you lose here and you lose the other side as well. You don't get your cake, neither do you eat it.
You just go hungry.
Okay, but KK, but your Chinese is quite good. How do you learn that?
I think this was more of a personal interest kind of thing, because I have always been someone who really likes to consume popular culture and media. So at home, when I was young, the TV was on and there was all these drama serials going on. And my family was more of a Chinese-speaking culture, Chinese and dialect. So it was always on Channel 8 or some kind of Mandarin channel. You just keep listening to it. And then as I get older, I got into Chinese pop.
Okay.
And then all these things just accumulated. When you listen to the songs and the lyrics and then you start reading them, then you do get some kind of better understanding of the language. And then you continue watching things in all these languages, especially the variety shows where they really don't speak from the script. They just talk naturally. It does help in gaining fluency in the language, and of course speaking, because I do have friends who actually used to have short stints or maybe working stints in like China or Taiwan. There is some fluency there in my social circle.
Okay, so it seems that it's also because of your family background, right? Because I guess some of our peers would think that it's difficult to learn the language if their parents don't speak the language and they only learn it in school. It's going to be very difficult. Both of you, have you ever experienced or encountered your friends who really shun their own mother tongue languages then? And what's their reason?
I did remember, full disclosure, I was from SAP school.
Oh, SAP school.
Yes, but even from SAP school, you can see some people who really do not like Mandarin and they do not like the language. So there was this group of people who actually resisted or rejected doing well in the language. And actually, they wore their identity very proudly, like, I do not like the language. I'm being forced to learn it.
Or
So
is it there's some kind of sense of superiority?
seems
in a
like
way?
it felt like that. So even in that kind of culture, school culture, where you would think that there's this emphasis on the Chinese culture and the Mandarin language, there are still pockets of people who rejected this. And I also see people who, when the Chinese B syllabus came up, they were very happy and they were like, yes, of course, why would I torture myself to go and learn the normal syllabus when I can just take this and take the easy way out? Anyway, it's just one subject in O levels and A levels.
How about Kishan?
Yeah, I was that person.
You were the person.
I was that person, and my friendship group in secondary school were made up of all these people because we prized English over everything else. And I latched on the word superiority. I totally agree, because I guess it was a defense mechanism, right? Away from your mother tongue, not realizing what you're losing, and then you couch it as, oh, I'm better than everyone else because I can speak English. I remember a time in my life where I would be so proud. And this is really awful, but I would be so proud when someone would look at me after I said something and then they would go like, oh, where are you from? I go, what do you mean? I'm Singaporean. They go, oh, why do you sound like that? Why do you have an accent? And then I feel like, oh, wow, that's really nice. Now, of course, it is awful. No one should talk like that, by the way. No one should talk. It's really awful. And it was because I was a naive child and I was just trying to find my place in this miasma of like language and culture for which I couldn't find an image for myself. So it was just confusion, it just became like that, right? So yeah, so a lot of my friends were like that. And interestingly, a lot of them were Chinese speaking because they really wanted to move away from Mandarin speaking because they found it difficult. They said it was character-based, so it was really tough and all that. However, on the other side, my Malay Muslim friends or friends of Malay heritage who spoke Bahasa Melayu, they were very in touch with their language culture. And I can't speak to why that is the case, but I saw a lot of it because I grew up having to learn Malay in school. So I saw a lot of that and they were very good and I felt very stupid in the class. But they also helped me develop a passion and a love for Bahasa Melayu, which I think is a poetic and a beautiful language. Yeah.
Okay. I have a friend who told me before in university that her English is really good, her pronunciation, everything. So she told me that her dad told her to don't be so good in Chinese lah, so that it doesn't screws up your English, so that you sound better. You don't sound like they call it Chinese helicopter, right? Yeah. So there are some parents who have this kind of like thinking that's passed down to their kids also.
Yeah, probably they feel like, you can only learn one language well, then everything will come and affect the ability in that one prime language. So, but I think that's conception. I think you can be good at many different languages. You don't lose your roots in that one language that you have learned before just because you learn other languages. I think you actually gain a lot more because, for example, if I speak for myself, I look at Mandarin, right? Then I look at the other East Asian languages. They all have related terms or sounds or things like that. So actually, it makes it easier for you to get closer to other types of languages, and you actually gain more in learning other people's cultures as well.
Oh, I totally agree. I think you gain more with every language that you learn, and I especially like what you said about access to another person's culture, because I think that is one of the reasons why I now enjoy learning languages, because I now have the ability to talk to a person, but it really opens up what it means to be in another person's culture, to witness another person's culture. Yeah, it's quite fantastic. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so Kay Key, you mentioned about this idea that people can only learn one language well. And this reminds me of this certain someone who celebrated his 100th birth anniversary today. I mean, not today, this year, which is very closely related to the bilingual policy in Singapore, right? So,
can we say his name? Why you say certain someone? It feels like we need to sage the room. What is that? We are, of course, talking about Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, right? Yes. Okay, great.
Wow, there's a lot of tension.
Yeah, why? Just say.
Because he was the main guy, right?
I guess everybody is probably informed by the times and their own experiences. I think he had only one or two languages he spoke in early parts of his life, right? So maybe that was something that he felt was relevant, and maybe he saw people around him also having that same issue. And probably at that point in time, you want to really concentrate on building a country, you need to unite. Like I said earlier and also in the op-ed, English did help to connect people, because here we are, three of us, we definitely speak other languages outside of English, but maybe we don't know each other's languages. But English, we can converse and we have such a deep conversation already. So that function still remains, right? And it has remained because Singaporeans mostly understand some level of English. So that is one advantage that will remain for us. But it's just that whether we lose other things in this blind pursuit of English fluency.
Actually, I'm curious, Kiki.
Okay.
Then what would be the situation here? Because it seems to be utility-driven. Because we are...
It was utility-driven, always been.
Exactly. So it is still a utility-driven pursuit, right? So we stayed away from other languages because that previously economic success was very much defined in a Western context. So everyone should learn English or some sort of Western language. Maybe if you learn a third language, we have the third language, right?
Yes,
you learn
I
third
remember
language.
that.
So French, German, Spanish, wow, you like gold star. Yeah. So that is very prized.
Yes.
But now as we move towards times where perhaps China is on the rise, I keep hearing that. Do you see a change where people are like, no, now we need to learn Mandarin a little bit more? Isn't it a little bit antithetical where when China is on the rise, we now have Chinese B, or is it actually par for the course?
Very good question.
I think there will always be economic considerations in learning languages. So you see business Chinese classes increasing and people wanting to go for it, right? And I also hear voices like people who used to be very proud that they cannot be fluent in Chinese saying that, oh no, now I need to go and do business in China, and so I'll go and learn and brush up on my Chinese, and I regret not paying attention in school last time. So there's always this kind of utility-driven thing. It probably will change based on whichever country and economy grows in the future. This is something that I think, especially for Singaporeans who are so pragmatic, you cannot lose.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think culture-wise, it really goes back to, your own identity and how you shape it based on language. So maybe there are people who really think that English is their base language, and they find more identity in that. But I think for a lot of Singaporeans, I mean, we are a country where we all immigrate here. Our forefathers immigrated here, right? I think we have a diversity of languages that actually is still left to explore, because even for myself, the dialects, Hokkien, Cantonese, these are all languages that actually have even more of a depth and culture compared to Mandarin that has for me and my roots.
Okay, but that's a very interesting question, Kishan, because you mentioned about China's economic power and, it's rising and, there's competition between US and China. But do we see the language, the Chinese language, do you see its status moving up in recent years then?
I think I do, but only in a very superficial sense. So instead of parents now saying, never mind, just focus on English can already because this is what your interview is going to be. This is the essays that you need to write. Now I have parents that go, you better study Chinese. You don't know who your boss is going to be the next time. You don't know who you need to impress. So the language has changed for parents onto their kids. That's for sure. But I don't know how much of a driver that is to inculcate some sort of intrinsic motivation in children, because nothing spells the death of anything than your parents telling you to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if there is an increased... I don't have sight of this enough, except for what I see in terms of behavior patterns in schools. Yeah, especially from the parents' perspective. Yeah.
What about Kay Key?
I tend to agree. I think probably they would be more interested in seeing, how much they score for their exams. But when it comes to actual fluency or interest in the language, they don't really care, or even just
do well in your exams,
know
is
enough to be able to say ni hao and thank you and something like that. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think while we say that, we always use this phrase, right? China is the next powerhouse. China is on the rise. There is the language used is that it is akan datang, or is coming. But now what children hear is like Spanish on Spotify. They hear French on TV. So the now very much overtakes the future tense.
Okay.
So children are children. They barely can see past next week and forget about 10 years. So they very much will focus on the now. And I think many kids are more interested in learning, I still think many kids are more interested in learning the Western languages, maybe the Romance languages or the Germanic languages, whatever it is, because they find it cooler. Their pop idol favorites know those languages, yeah.
Or even Korean, because K-pop.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good example. Yeah, Korean.
I've heard of parents, right, instead of sending their kids to English, math, science classes, right, tuition classes, they're sending them to Chinese because that's the only class that they can't teach their kids. They're helpless. And that's why they have to send their kids to, tuition centers that's named after a fruit. We all know what's there.
Yes.
I don't.
We'll tell you later.
Okay, can. Okay. I don't know if kids like it though. And I don't know if it's a resounding sort of, I don't know if it says anything if I'm sending you to it, because because we as parents cannot teach it, so I'm sending my kids there. Because what happens when they come out of the tuition center, then they go back home and they speak in English, they listen to Korean songs, they listen to Japanese songs, they watch TV, and then they hear Spanish being spoken. It just leaves. What it just gives is more homework.
Yes. But it's also quite interesting because, some of the people in my social circle, they are Chinese speaking, as in they are quite okay in conversing daily languages, daily conversation in Mandarin. But then their children, not good.
Okay.
Like
they couldn't speak Chinese.
If you speak to them in Chinese, they could understand, but they'll reply back in English.
Right.
So it's a very interesting phenomenon, because I've realized that sort of the new parents in this generation who have kids below 10 years old, a lot of them don't seem to be able to teach their kids those languages, even if they know it themselves. It's a very interesting phenomenon.
Oh, so you're saying that they can speak it,
Yes.
but they just don't know how to teach it?
But it seems like their children are
they
not
can
picking up.
understand it, but they can't even speak it, is it?
The parents can speak.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
they just don't know how to teach it to their kids, is it?
Or they have not been successful in getting their children to retain Mandarin speaking
But I
skills.
find that is
Yeah.
the case even for math. Parents now look at the math textbook and go like, I have no idea what is happening. So I find that maybe, I wonder, okay, I don't have enough context, knowledge or statistics about this, but I wonder if it's just because education has moved a little bit faster sometimes for now versus our parents' time. And when they look at it, things are a little bit different. They don't know what to do. I am not sure about that. Yeah.
But I would say for language, it's slightly different because you can still use it in daily conversations. Like simple questions, have you eaten, or what do you eat?
I see.
The children reply in English.
Why do you think there is such resistance for these kids to not even reply, even the most basic things?
I have no idea. They're so young. I can't ask them.
That's true. I've seen it before.
That's really interesting.
And it was very weird.
Yeah.
I was very confused.
Maybe because they feel like it's not cool, right? Like, why are you not
how
cool?
do they know that it's not cool at such a young age?
Yeah.
That's the problem, you see.
Oh, social media is pervasive. It's really awful. I think, I don't know, maybe from their siblings or whatever, we can just guess here, yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea. Probably, maybe the schools they go to speak more in English. Or
We can only guess, I guess.
it's a very difficult question.
Yeah, recently I spoke to a couple who has a very young kid, right? So the couple is like very ordinary Singaporean couple. I spoke to them in English, but when they were speaking to their kid, they were just speaking in Chinese throughout. Then I was very, very shocked. Then I was like, hey, what are you doing, man? Like, how come you're speaking so much Chinese to your kid? And then their rationale was very interesting because they said that my kid will be going to school and she's going to learn English no matter what. All the subjects are being taught in English. So we thought that it's better if we just speak Chinese to her so that she can learn it.
Oh, that's a great strategy, I think. So they've
Yeah.
compartmentalized the exposure. Right? No, but I think that's a great strategy and they're not wrong, right?
They're not wrong, but
Yeah.
I was so confused because they were speaking English to me, was speaking Chinese to the kid.
That's pretty cool.
Code switch in front of you.
Yeah.
I wonder what lasting effects this might have on the child's neurolinguistics.
Yeah, and I know of
interesting.
friends the father will speak English and then the mother will speak Chinese so that they become like really effectively bilingual, ideally.
Yeah, a lot of friend couples like that who I heard like that as well. Yeah, one would take one language only, and then the kid would actually be pretty good at code switching between parents, which is rather impressive, I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think language learning abilities actually are much better when you are young. So it's probably a good strategy if you want your child to learn more languages. And this seems to be the strategy, like the one parent, one language thing, seems to be a strategy that some of those mixed race or mixed nationality couples like to use as well. So it could be a good strategy.
Okay, I just wanted to go back to your op-ed again because remember when we first sent it to Straits Times and it got published, and then KK, you got a lot of feedback after it got published.
Oh wow, so juicy. What happened?
What kind of feedback do you get then?
I got some emails that actually wrote a reply op-ed.
They wrote very long
like in a
emails,
sense
right?
that yes, like it's basically when I said that there's some advantages for English, then perhaps that person's title would be like English has had its disadvantages, and then it goes on to talk a lot about why and the reasons why. So it was really like an op-ed in itself.
That's one of them, right?
Yeah.
I think the other one was just, actually I saw quite a few was, no lah, Singaporeans are not proficient in English at all.
Yes.
It's
Another
just
one.
Singlish.
Yes.
They are not good in English. They are not good at their mother tongue
yes.
languages also,
Yes.
right?
But I also got some reply emails from people who say, oh, yes, it actually speaks to me as a parent when I'm trying to teach my child their mother tongue. The difficulty of teaching children their mother tongue seems to be a prevalent problem.
Ah, I see. Okay. That's very interesting that you got an onslaught of reply there. It makes me think about, I didn't realize how touchy this issue about language could be, or can be rather, because you're saying you got so many different emails talking about many different aspects of it, and all of them were contrary, right? If you said A, they went B. If you said B, they go A. So I guess
it's quite an emotional topic,
exactly.
right, in Singapore.
It's quite an emotional topic, and I'm just wondering about why it's such an emotional topic. Probably because it's like holding a mirror up to ourselves, right? When we say like we are good in English or we're not good in English, it's a reflection of who we are, and we tend to take that a little bit too personally sometimes. And you got the brunt of it via email.
Yeah, I didn't know that this would happen when I published the op-ed.
It's quite intriguing that happened.
Yeah.
But KK, do you know of some possible reasons why it's so emotional then?
Oh, I think it's really related to everybody's personal journeys when learning languages, especially when you have emotional reactions or painful stories when it comes to people talking about you being good or bad at a certain language. So these probably all triggered something, especially when you're growing up, you're more sensitive to all these things, and people are telling you things like viewpoints from their own perspectives, and then you just need to all take it in and understand and, analyze for yourself what is the path you want to take. But when you're young, it's very hard to find your own identity. And language is a very important part of your identity because people do take their language skills or lack of as part of that identity. And it will shape you. So I think it really speaks to a lot of people when you talk about language, thinking back now, because when I publish one viewpoint, it's like people...
It's triggered.
It doesn't
Everyone's
speak,
triggered.
It doesn't speak to my experience. So, so why are you saying this?
Okay.
Something like that.
That's so interesting. Actually, it is rather disappointing that people can't see beyond themselves. But I'm also not surprised.
Okay.
That's pretty cool.
But this really reminds me, when I saw the responses, right, that it reminds me of, so for myself, my family background is also very Chinese. In fact, I was a journalist in the Chinese media. My family, I think they will react quite emotionally also because, for example, my mom, she was actually quite a good student in secondary school. But because during that time, the education system suddenly changed, right? And it moved towards the English language. And she couldn't cope. So she had to drop out. Yeah, she couldn't continue her education and drop out, and she's now a blue-collar worker. And we saw so many examples, like my uncle, maybe he coped better, like he's a bit younger, so he could adapt a bit more, and he managed to get into university. But for a lot of my relatives, they couldn't continue their education. They couldn't switch from the Chinese stream to the English stream. And I think there's a lot of angst about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of the older generation Chinese complaining that young people nowadays cannot speak the language well, or they don't understand the nuances because we cannot read those ancient texts, which is written in an older form of the language.
Yeah. But Kishan, how about the Hindi language then? Do you see anything similar in that form?
I think because the Indian languages never historically, or at least post-independence, never historically featured
Prominently.
Prominently, right? This was never an issue because English was always somewhat of a language that we all had to fall back on. Like my mom and dad are fully conversant in English, and my grandfather was fully conversant in English. My grandmother, so they all had to really learn it because as a minority, you have to learn it. One of the beautiful things about being a minority, and there are a few about being a minority, is that you have to learn all languages. So yes, I can speak Malay because I've learned it, but I also can speak Mandarin because it's just there, right?
It's everywhere in Singapore, right?
It's everywhere, and I have to get by with some Mandarin, and that is a complex topic on its own already, that I have to do that. So I don't know if there's an equivalent here because the racial makeup is just different and the historical context for the presence of the language in Singapore is just different. Yeah.
This really reminds me of Kay Key. Remember, there was a period of time when there was some debate about new migrants. They need to pass an English language test in order to integrate into our society. Do you think that's very important?
Knowing the language should be something that you need to start doing if you want to move to a country. And in Singapore, people still default to the English language most of the time for most groups. And so I think at least understanding and being able to converse, where is this place, where's the toilet, where do I go, something like that at least speaks to your effort in integrating into a new place that you have chosen for your own home. So yeah, I think it's the effort that I would expect immigrants to make, at least.
On some level, I do agree, right? There is the side of the coin where you're showing effort to want to integrate, but on the other side of the coin is also to help you be a bit functional in this country. Because if not, it's going to be so much of a challenge, and who knows what the fallout from that challenge might be, right? There could be emotional, mental strain, and nobody wants that for that person coming in, and perhaps also nobody wants that for the country, where we take more people in where they can't cope. That's not the point also, right? Again, looking at the very pragmatic and practical stance of it. Yeah. But I also have to say that perhaps, and I've not seen sight of these tests, but I also wonder what is the rigor of such tests,
Yes.
and whether is it too rigorous? I don't know. Do they have to read like a comprehension O-level style? I doubt it, right? But I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think Kishan, you also mentioned about Chinese being quite prevalent. I mean, not prevalent, but it's commonly spoken in Singapore, right?
So, it is prevalent.
Prevalent sounds bad. I'm sorry.
No, it's statistically it's prevalent.
Yeah.
Yes, it is prevalent. Yes.
Yeah, but so I guess mooting that English test thing, right, seems to be some kind of response of some of our new immigrants who can only speak Chinese, and actually it's possible for them to survive in Singapore just speaking Mandarin exclusively, which of course it might be not so great for our minorities in Singapore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does feel there is a danger here of a double standard coming in, right? You allow for this, then would you also allow the same for, let's say, Malay-speaking individual who might not be good in English? Would you just allow that person to come in based on their Malay ability, their Tamil ability for a South Indian person? I don't know if those are equal playing fields in Singapore. Yeah, so I think those would be difficult. So an English sort of test would be, and it is really awful to think about it like that, but it is like an equalizer. Yeah, and I say awful because I'm just thinking of colonial. It's just colonial baggage. Yeah.
Yeah. KK, what do you think then?
I think there are a few layers to this, right? So I would expect people who are trying to apply for citizenship in Singapore to have at least some level of written ability in English. At the very least, even if they choose not to speak it in real life.
So it's not that they should be able to speak but cannot write. You think that writing is more important?
No, so I mean, this is what I'm thinking, because I think for many countries in the world, English is an examinable subject. So they should be able to at least pass tests. It doesn't mean that they can speak as well or their accent is not strong. But I think what is more important is the ability to communicate daily with other people. So that is a bigger point for me than being able to pass MCQs or comprehension.
And some people may be able to mark, right?
Yes.
And manage to pass the test.
And it's just an empty pass, right? Like
Yes.
what does that mean in the practical sense?
Yeah.
I think I agree with you there, yeah.
That really reminded me of my secondary school classmates who can't speak Chinese but can get A1 for Chinese.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely right. There was a point in my life where my Malay is, I'm proud to say it's not too bad, but sometimes I have no idea what I'm reading, but because it's alphabet and you just, as long as you know the phonetics, you can get it right. And I got distinction for my A-level oral, but I had no idea what it was saying.
Yes.
You can ace the test, but doesn't mean that you can use it in daily lives, right?
Because I also remember in my SAP school, SAP school, right? They
it's okay, so I was also from a SAP school too. I can share the shame with you.
Okay. It's okay.
So they also offer Chinese literature as an examinable topic. So some people who choose it are less fluent than I am and many people in the language. But because the way it's examined is you do have set answers that you can read and just
Memorize.
regurgitate during exams. They actually do very well in the exams.
That sounds like a flaw in the exam model.
I hope they have changed it. Yeah, so I think these things are considerations when we think about language, right? It's not really just about being able to understand it or even to pass an exam. To me, knowing a language means to understand what different sentences mean, to appreciate the beauty of different types of ways that the language is being expressed by different people. Like, different sentences may mean the same thing if you translate. Like, I'm going for a meal. But it can sound very different when it goes to a different language because of the connotations, the context that's used. So I think that's the beauty of the language. And that was one of the main reasons why I wrote the op-ed, because I think we shouldn't lose that beauty and culture behind these languages. Translation will just give you the plain meaning. Sometimes it's not even the real contextualized meaning behind that thing, but you only understand what's going on, not 100%.
Yeah, to that point, Kiki, what would you want if you had carte blanche, right? Like, could do whatever you want, right? What would you like to happen in Singapore to bring back this strong anchor that language tends to have with culture? What would you do?
Oh, it's a very tough question. But it would be nice to have less of a practical concern for language itself as a topic, for example, in school, and more to really engage the students in understanding the language itself. So even from the way I learned, it's really via media and pop culture.
Yeah.
There's pop culture for nearly every language that we are familiar with, right?
Absolutely,
here.
yeah.
So we can use those things like watch Bollywood movies,
Yeah.
watch K-pop or Chinese Mandarin variety shows, all those things. These can work because if you let people understand how the language can be used in real life and how it can be translated into entertaining things, people get more interested and, they
Yeah.
naturally want to delve deeper.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think as an educator, I think I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm distilling it through an educator's brain. It is perhaps finding relevance to the student that you're teaching and making it more exciting and interesting for them, in a way that speaks to them. And I think that goes a long way into bridging content and delivery. But in language learning, I find, perhaps in some languages more than others, there's also a sense of shame associated with learning the language. There's a sense of, I feel embarrassed. That's what I mean by the shame. I feel embarrassed to speak it. And I don't know if the mode that you've talked about, even though practically as an educator it seems right, I don't know if that can overcome a lot of the shame and the embarrassment in speaking it, because it is like generational.
Generational trauma.
Yeah, it is a bit like generational, because your parents don't speak it.
Yeah.
The kids now, the parents don't speak it. So they go like, my parents don't speak it. Is there something wrong in me speaking it? Because parents are supposed to be like this ideal, right? So even if you don't consciously put them on a pedestal, subconsciously they're on a pedestal and you see how they function, you go like, oh, why are they not functioning like that? I think, and I understand why it was a difficult question that I threw at you, because it is a tough thing to do, to bring back language to the forefront of things.
Yeah, but I mean, these issues that you have spoken about, I totally agree. But I think it's really a long-term kind of thing, right? It's a long-drawn process. You cannot change a generation. And for most part, many of them are already fixed in their ways.
You're right.
Yeah.
So you can only start working from the new generation and slowly inculcate. Norms take time to change.
Yeah.
Culture takes time to change. Yeah. So that's the only way forward, I think.
Yeah.
You cannot keep looking backwards and regretting history.
What I find cool though, and I saw this coming up in like my early 30s. Late 30s.
Exposure.
Now I'm in my late 30s, but in my early 30s, yes, in my early 30s, I noticed that there was a trend of younger people going onto social media and talking and speaking dialect. They go like, hey, learn dialect, this is cool, learn this, learn that, learn this, learn that. And it was really quite amazing to see. And I think Pritam Singh, our leader of the opposition, his wife has an Instagram account where she teaches people Punjabi.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is fantastic. So people have taken to Instagram or social media, whatever the platform, to sort of make dialect and languages that don't predominantly feature in Singapore a little bit more accessible and a little bit more cool. I think this is an interesting way forward, because social media seems to be where it's at. As much as I hate it, it's very tiring. But I think it's where it's at and where our kids' attentions are all focused. Yeah. So this could be a cool platform.
Yeah, but also maybe we have to move away from the utility side of learning languages, because once you know that it's something, it must be useful, it must be important, then it's examinable, right? Then it takes the fun of learning languages, totally. Right? It has to be something that is more organic. You are learning it for fun.
Interest. I want to know what they are saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's really that kind of interest and the why and the what that would make you learn the language deeper rather than getting an A in your exam.
Yeah.
IPS being IPS, the Institute of Policy Studies, one of our last questions will be, what are some policy recommendations that we can,
That's tough.
raise?
Former educator.
Not former, still
current educator.
No longer with the MOE. I think this is a tough one, because we have linked language to culture. And I agree. I wholeheartedly agree that language is a strong anchor to culture, because I experienced that when I went back to Hindi. But having moved away from Hindi a long time, I also realized I never lost my culture, because there were many other ways into it. So if indeed the thesis is language is a way to understand our culture a little bit better, then I put a question mark on this first. I go like, if this is not the only way, can we step back? Can we step back and let kids learn whatever languages they want and allow them to access culture differently? And perhaps through that interaction with culture, through different modes, the necessary parts of language will come in. And because then they will still have access to their culture, because that's the main thing here, right? If we lose language, we lose culture. So let's find ways to get knee-deep in culture. Then I think when you have kids learn the languages that they want, whether it is one of the languages in our Singaporean culture, whether it's Malay, Tamil, Mandarin, or one of the non-Tamil Indian languages, or maybe even Korean, Japanese, whatever. I think kids will have so much more interest in it. I think they will fly a bit more. They'll go like, wow, okay, I really want to learn Spanish. I really want to learn Japanese. And then they put so much more effort into it, and that interest will drive them. It will become intrinsic motivation. So one of the policies that I would like to see is, can we find ways to allow kids to just learn the languages they want and not tie it and not have a cultural marker attached to it?
Wow, that's very difficult.
Why?
Resources.
Why is it difficult when we've only created the constraints? We've created all our own boundaries. We've put the fence up for ourselves, so we have the tools to take the fence down. So yes, we only say that it's difficult because we are thinking within the constraints that we've set up for ourselves. Yeah. So I think if we expand it, resources will come, and we have money, no problem. Resources will come, and students might be a little bit more interested, and Singaporeans might be more amenable to learning a language. Culture is still a thing, but we can find other ways to access that.
Okay, how about Kay Key?
I actually thought of something while y'all were talking.
Okay.
So one main big part of actually getting fluent in a language is to use it, right? If we remain within that box of the official mother tongues, why not we just, institute like certain days of the week, everybody speak English, certain days of the week, everybody speaks Mandarin and Malay and Tamil.
I'm getting
like
1984 vibes.
As in, to me, it's more of making people really converse, then you can really take away the shame of certain languages because it's a common communicator. And then you see that people who are not good at a certain language suddenly, actually, I'm not superior after all because other people are better than me in that language. So it equalizes things.
That's really cool.
And actually, you do get to practice more rather than just going for a specific language class where you speak or you don't even speak. You listen to the teacher speak to you for half an hour or 45 minutes.
I think that's interesting and
quite radical.
Yeah, it's quite radical. The only issue is about policing, like who will ensure this. But I think the heart of that is to take away the shame and the embarrassment from speaking the language, right? To give people access to do that. So I can see where you're coming from, though. Yeah.
So I'd like to thank my guests, Dr. Teo Kay Key and Kishan Singh, for their time today. Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of On Diversity. On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. We are available on all major podcast platforms. Please follow or subscribe to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website, ipscommons.sg, for more information.